Hi there, I'm Eileen. I used to believe that family was unconditional, until the night my own mother tried to erase me over something as simple as my passion. They called it an embarrassing hobby, but behind closed doors, they plotted to push me out for good. How does chasing a dream become a reason to be cast aside? Before we dive in, have you ever felt like you had to hide your true self just to stay loved? Tell me below. The message from my mother blinked on my phone screen like a cold command. Family meeting, 7 p.m. sharp, be there. No warmth, no explanation, just expectation wrapped in duty. Driving toward my childhood home, my fingers drummed nervously against the steering wheel. Sacramento's streets blurred past, familiar yet distant, as if I was steering not toward my family, but toward a verdict I couldn't escape. The house looked perfect, as always. The lawn trimmed with almost surgical precision, the white shutters gleaming under the fading sun. It was a shrine to appearances, a shrine where love had long ago been sacrificed for status. I paused at the door, my heart thudding against my ribs. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and something heavier, like the sharp metallic scent before a storm. Inside, the living room had been staged. Darlene, my mother, sat on the love seat, legs crossed tightly, hands resting primly on her lap. Calvin, my father, stood by the fireplace, posture stiff like a judge ready to deliver sentencing. Rochelle, Clarissa, and Jonas flanked them, silent, expressionless. There was one empty chair, placed directly across from them, like a spotlight. I sat, because what else does a dutiful daughter do, even when she knows the blade is coming? Darlene spoke first, her voice laced with syrupy concern. "Eileen, we're worried about you," she said, smiling the way someone smiles when they are about to cut something out. "Your hobby, it's not just embarrassing anymore, it's dangerous. To you, to us. Dangerous." That was the word they chose for the life I had painstakingly built with my own hands. Calvin's voice followed, colder. "You're damaging the family's reputation. The Warnos name carries weight in Sacramento. We can't afford distractions." I opened my mouth to defend myself, to tell them about the orders growing daily, the gallery that had just accepted 3 of my pieces. But Rochelle's sharp intake of breath silenced me. Clarissa wouldn't meet my gaze. Jonas stared at his phone like I was already gone. Then Darlene laid it bare. "If you choose to continue down this path," she said, her smile thin and slicing, "then you are no longer welcome as part of this family." For a moment I thought I had misheard, that maybe there was a hidden choice, a compromise. There wasn't. I stood. My legs felt numb, my palms clammy, but I stood without shaking. No tears, no begging, only silence. I walked out of that perfect house without looking back. Their faces blurred into a single, immovable wall of expectation and disappointment. The evening air hit my face like a slap. I climbed into my car, the leather seats stiff and unwelcoming, and started the engine. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, lining my exit like reluctant sentinels. As I drove away, my phone buzzed against the dashboard, an email notification from my mother. No, not from her, forwarded by mistake. My hands trembled as I opened it at a red light, threads of conversation, plans, discussions of when and how to confront me, how best to phrase the ultimatum so I couldn't argue, couldn't make them look bad. I wasn't a disappointment. I was a liability to be managed, a stain they were eager to scrub out. The light turned green. I didn't move. Sitting there, heart hammering against my ribs, I realized something broken beyond repair had finally snapped. They hadn't just cast me out tonight. They had never intended to keep me at all. The door to my tiny studio clicked shut behind me, muffling the patter of rain against the street outside. I leaned back against it, letting the silence soak into my skin. Sacramento was quiet tonight, save for the occasional tire hissing over wet asphalt. Inside, my world felt even quieter, eerily hollow, like a stage after the actors had exited. I dropped my purse on the small kitchen counter and stood there, arms limp at my sides. For a moment, I stared at the blinking light on my answering machine, but my body refused to move. I felt like a shell of myself, as if the confrontation earlier had scooped something vital out of me. I don't remember crossing the room. I only remember the soft whir of my laptop booting up, the pale blue glow filling the tiny space. Somehow, instinctively, I needed to anchor myself to something, even if it was just checking emails, a pointless ritual in a life that had just been detonated. That's when I saw it. One new email, forwarded from my mother. I blinked, heart stumbling. Maybe she had sent an apology. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe... I clicked it open. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a mistake. It was a thread. A chain of cold, calculated messages between my mother, Calvin, Rochelle, Clarissa, and Jonas. Planning, strategizing. If she refuses to accept the terms, we proceed without her. We need to act before her choices start reflecting poorly on the family name. Make it clean, no arguments, no drama. The words blurred, but I forced myself to read them. Every sentence another hammer to my ribs, every agreement another inch of ground crumbling under my feet. They hadn't been reacting tonight. They had been executing a plan meticulously crafted to erase me. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was cold, premeditated. And I had walked into it willingly, naive enough to believe love had anything to do with it. I sat back, the screen reflecting in my glassy eyes. For a long time, I just stared, at their names, at their words. The rain outside became a roar against the windows, but I barely heard it. I thought back to every smile that had felt too tight, every hug that had lingered just a second too long, like an obligation. I wasn't fighting to be loved. I was fighting to be tolerated, and I had lost. The first sob cracked from my chest without warning, sharp and ugly. I pressed my palms to my face, the tears burning hot trails down my skin. But it didn't last long. Grief gave way to something else. A slow, rising ember of anger that dried my cheeks before I could even register it. They thought they could dictate who I was. They thought they could prune me from their perfect little garden without consequence. I wiped my face and sat up straighter. The laptop's glow seemed to pulse with me, steady and alive. On the workbench beside me, a half-finished bracelet lay, delicate wires twisted into tentative shapes. I reached for it, my hands still trembling, but this time not from sorrow. No more begging, no more bending. I pulled out my sketchbook, flipping past old designs filled with hope and compliance. Tonight, the lines I drew were sharper, hungrier, a phoenix rising from broken chains. The rain tapped harder against the window, a furious applause to a silent vow. They may have severed me from the family name, but I would build a name that outlasted theirs. The message came wrapped in guilt. Calvin's voice on the voicemail was measured, almost tender. Just one more meeting, Eileen. One chance to make things right. The word right echoed in my mind all the way to their front door. The same house, the same perfect lawn, but tonight the air was heavier, the front porch light casting long, accusing shadows across the driveway. I pressed the doorbell. It buzzed like a wasp trapped in a jar. Inside, everything was staged again. The living room had been transformed into a courtroom. Darlene on the love seat, arms folded tightly across her chest. Calvin standing, papers in hand like an executive ready for a hostile takeover. Rochelle, Clarissa, and Jonas sat with polite, blank expressions, waiting for the show to begin. I stepped inside. Nobody offered a smile. Nobody asked how I was. Just the empty space left for me, the defendant's seat. Calvin cleared his throat. "This isn't a confrontation, sweetheart," he began, voice syrupy and false. "This is an intervention, because we love you, and we're worried." He placed a thick folder on the coffee table between us. Inside, I imagined, were the reasons why my life, my choices, my dreams, were invalid. Evidence compiled to declare me guilty of failing to meet their standards. The room smelled like floor polish and old fear. I folded my hands neatly in my lap, refusing to reach for the file. Calvin continued, outlining their proposal. I would abandon my business, reintegrate into the family brand, work under Rochelle's management to rebuild the Warnos name properly. Everything carefully structured to minimize the embarrassment my independence had apparently caused. My throat felt tight, but I said nothing. Then Darlene rose from her seat. She walked me to the hallway, out of earshot of the others, though not out of their sight. She leaned in close, her voice a knife dipped in honey. "If you don't give this up," she whispered, "you are no longer part of this family, for good." The words didn't land like a blow, they landed like confirmation, an echo of what I had already known, but had refused to let myself believe. I nodded, once, calmly. No tears, no protests, no bargaining. I turned and walked back through the living room, past the folder, past the careful staging, past the life they had already edited me out of, out into the cool Sacramento night, where the stars blinked like distant witnesses to my quiet unraveling. Driving home, the city lights blurred into smeared constellations. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but the pain felt clean. It was something real to hold on to. Back in my studio, the silence welcomed me like an old friend. I dropped my keys into the dish by the door, toed off my shoes, and walked straight to my desk. My phone buzzed again, a text from Darlene, no doubt. I deleted it without reading. Then, slowly, deliberately, I deleted every message from her, from Calvin, from all of them. I stared at the empty screen for a long moment, breathing in the void they left behind. And then I whispered into the stillness, "If I'm an outsider, I'll build my own kingdom." I pulled my sketchbook closer. The pencil felt heavy at first, but as it touched the paper, something inside me cracked open. The lines I drew were not delicate or tentative this time. They were bold, unapologetic, not begging for a seat at anyone's table, but carving a new one with my own two hands. The invitation came in a group text, as if formality could soften the edges of history. Rochelle was hosting a family barbecue in her picture-perfect backyard. Darlene called it a casual reconnecting moment, as if we hadn't severed something fundamental just weeks before. Still, I said yes, maybe out of habit. Maybe out of that stubborn flicker of hope that family might eventually mean what it was supposed to. The sun was too bright that afternoon. Sacramento bloomed with spring, the air thick with pollen and pretense. Rochelle's yard was lined with string lights and curated centerpieces. Voices floated like perfume, warm, effortless, excluding. I stood near the drink table, half smiling, pretending to sip lemonade that had already turned warm in my hand. Conversations buzzed around me, none of them tethered to me. I was there, but not truly present, like a faded photograph left out of its frame. Darlene approached with her signature glass of Chardonnay and that tight smile she wore like armor. She gestured toward the bracelet on my wrist, one I had made myself, twisted from copper and softened leather. "That's cute," she said with a light laugh. "You know, even trash can look valuable if you shine it just right." Her voice carried, louder than necessary. A few heads turned. Someone chuckled. I felt the laughter crack along my spine. I didn't answer, just tucked my hands into my pockets and nodded like she'd complimented the weather. A moment later, she held up her own wrist for everyone to admire. "Now this," she beamed, "is a handcrafted piece I bought from that artist downtown. Real craftsmanship. And sustainable too." She turned her wrist so it caught the light. No one said a word. They didn't have to. The message was clear. My work, my life, was invisible in plain sight. Clarissa leaned in to get a better look. Rochelle clapped politely. Jonas stayed by the grill, flipping burgers like he hadn't noticed. I stood still, surrounded by voices that never touched me. My throat felt tight, but I kept my face steady, smiling just enough to pass. Inside, something was tearing open, slow, soundless. I wasn't ashamed of my work. I was ashamed that I still hoped they'd see it. The party blurred around me. Kids screamed somewhere near the pool. A neighbor dropped off a pie. Rochelle's husband made a toast. And I floated through it all like a body in water, still and sinking. I found a quiet moment near the dessert table before leaving. In my pocket, I carried a tiny charm I had made the night before, copper leaf with etchings only I could read. I placed it among the lemon bars, nestled between paper doilies. A signature, not for them to notice, for me to know I had been there. As I turned to go, I whispered to myself, "You can't erase what you refuse to see." The studio was quiet that night, too quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't comfort, just reminded you of how loud the absence was. I had my hands buried in wires and stones, trying to distract myself with texture and rhythm. But no amount of sanding or polishing could soften the dull ache under my ribs. I hadn't heard from anyone since the backyard gathering. No calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive email about disappointing the family. Just a strange, echoing silence that made me wonder if I had imagined it all, until I opened my browser and checked Rochelle's social media. I shouldn't have, I knew better. But I was lonely, and loneliness is a cruel negotiator. There they were, photos from the event, cousins, kids, smiling tanned faces lined up under string lights and floral arches. All of them, except me, even in the wide group shots, where I remembered standing shoulder to shoulder with Clarissa and Jonas. I was simply gone. Either they had cropped me out or deliberately posed again after I left. It didn't matter which. The result was the same. I was invisible, erased. I stared at the screen, the room suddenly cold despite the early summer heat. The lemonade glass beside me had sweated a ring onto my notebook. My heartbeat was loud enough to hear. Then my phone buzzed. It was Jonas. I blinked, unsure what to expect. The message was short. "You're not part of the picture anymore. Don't embarrass yourself." I didn't cry. I thought I might, but the tears refused to come, blocked by something sharper than sadness. Rage. Not the kind that screams. The kind that simmers so quietly it could almost be mistaken for calm. I closed the tab, deleted the bookmark, deleted the browser history, deleted every digital reminder that I had once tried to belong to something that never made space for me. The bracelet I had been working on lay unfinished. I pushed it aside. Instead, I reached for my blank sketchbook. Its cover was smooth, untouched, full of possibility. I flipped to the first page, picked up my pen. At the top, I wrote, "For those who thought I didn't exist." Then I began to draw. The lines came quickly, almost violently. Curves and edges that didn't ask permission. A collection forming in my mind, jewelry that told the story not of grief, but of survival, of rebirth from silence. My fingers ached, but I kept going. The page filled, and something in me started to shift, just slightly. Not forgiveness, not peace, but power. A quiet kind, the kind you carry in your chest without having to explain it to anyone. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees, whispering against the windows. Inside, I kept writing. The local fair bustled with noise and color, a mess of hand-painted signs and laughter that floated on the early summer heat. My booth sat near the corner, tucked between a woman selling lavender soap and a man carving wooden toys. It wasn't glamorous, but for the first time in months, I felt a real solid flicker of pride. Strangers admired my work, asked about my process, paid for pieces crafted by hands they had never judged. It wasn't everything, but it was something that was mine. I packed up late that afternoon, my heart lighter than it had been in a long time, which is probably why I said yes when Rochelle invited me to a casual brunch with some of the extended family the next morning. Maybe it would be different, I thought. Maybe the tiny victories mattered. Maybe they'd finally see me. The cafe was too bright, the clink of silverware too sharp. Rochelle had reserved a long table outside, white tablecloth fluttering slightly in the breeze. Everyone was there, smiling, chatting, pretending nothing had cracked wide open between us. I slid into an empty seat at the end. An afterthought, like always. It happened halfway through coffee. Rochelle, swirling her mimosa lazily, turned to the group and laughed. Sometimes I wonder if Eileen was switched at birth. She's so different from the rest of us. The chuckles came, soft but swift. No one defended me. No one even looked uncomfortable. I stared at the orange slice perched on the rim of my water glass, pretending I hadn't heard it, pretending it didn't feel like my DNA itself was being peeled away, strand by strand. After brunch, word drifted back to me from mutual friends. Rochelle had been whispering that I was a college dropout, that my hobby was a result of never really finishing anything. They couldn't erase me physically, so they chose to dismantle me piece by piece behind closed doors. For a few moments, I stood frozen outside the cafe, the sun pressing down like a hand trying to smother me. Then slowly, I walked back in. Rochelle was laughing at something Clarissa said, her face open and golden under the patio lights. I stepped up beside her chair. "You know, I said lightly, the edges of my words razor sharp. It's funny how you're so invested in my failures when you've spent your life terrified to risk anything yourself. The table went still. A fork clattered against a plate. Clarissa coughed awkwardly. Rochelle blinked, her smile faltering for just a moment before she let out a short, brittle laugh. "Relax, Eileen," she said. "It's just family teasing." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "It's rewriting history, and you're not the author of my story." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. As I walked away, my eyes caught Darlene's across the table. For the first time, I saw something flicker there, something that looked a lot like fear. They were starting to realize I wasn't the same girl who sat quietly at the edge of every family photo, desperate to be included. I wasn't afraid of them anymore, and I wasn't going to let them write me out without a fight. The community center buzzed with polite chatter and the clink of cheap glassware. Tables lined the edges of the wide hall, decorated with recycled centerpieces that looked suspiciously store-bought. Family members bustled in branded t-shirts promoting the charity they claimed to champion, but the smiles they wore felt stretched thin, brittle under the fluorescent lights. I stood near the entrance, the flyer for the event trembling slightly in my hands, though not from the breeze sneaking through the cracked windows. I had come thinking, hoping, that perhaps amidst all this posturing for the public, we might find a shard of something genuine. A foolish thought. Clarissa spotted me first. She offered a mechanical wave before quickly turning away, pretending to adjust a centerpiece. Rochelle arrived moments later, exchanging air kisses and handshakes, never once meeting my eyes. And Darlene, Queen of the Ice, swooped in moments after, her voice loud enough to carry across the room as she spoke with a guest. I swallowed hard, squaring my shoulders. When an announcement was made about a silent auction to raise extra funds, I approached the organizer, offering a selection of my handcrafted jewelry to contribute. Before the woman could even smile, Darlene appeared, her voice sweet and slicing. "We appreciate the thought, Eileen," she said, layering each word with condescension. "But we're trying to keep the auction professional." My offering hung between us, invisible and unwanted. The organizer mumbled something about tight schedules and limited space. I nodded, retreating with my tray of rejected pieces, the weight of them suddenly unbearable. I told myself to breathe, to be bigger, to let it roll off. But then Clarissa leaned over to a nearby group, her stage whisper loud enough to carry. "Well, you know," she said, fake laughing, "we have to be careful. Some homemade items aren't exactly up to code. You can't risk health violations." A few of the guests chuckled, some glancing awkwardly at me and then away. I felt the flush creep up my neck, the humiliation sharp and hot. The rage that simmered in my gut boiled over, but it didn't erupt outward. Instead, it crystallized, sharp and deliberate. I crossed the room with slow, steady steps. Clarissa was near the refreshments, pretending to fuss over napkins. I stopped beside her, so close she couldn't pretend not to notice. "If you ever drag my name through the mud again," I said quietly, "don't expect me to stay silent." Her eyes widened, mouth parting in shock. For once she had no clever retort, no cutting laugh. I waited a beat longer, just to make sure the warning sunk in, then turned on my heel, leaving her standing there, small and rattled. Back in the main hall, I held my head higher. Let them stare. Let them whisper. Next time they came at me, they would find a different Eileen, one who had learned that survival wasn't about shrinking small enough to fit their idea of acceptable. It was about standing so firmly in my own skin that no one could peel me away from it again. The invitation came handwritten, a strange and desperate flourish in an age of text messages. Darlene's neat script curled across cream stationery, calling for a family reconciliation dinner. It smelled like perfume and something older, an ache I didn't want to name. Still, I went. Maybe because I needed to see it through. Maybe because closure doesn't come from silence. Their house looked the same, perfectly manicured lawn, carefully polished windows. But under the porch light, the cracks were more visible now. Inside, they had laid out the good china. Calvin greeted me with a handshake instead of a hug, his smile stiff. Rochelle, Clarissa, and Jonas already sat at the table, plates half filled, eyes half hopeful, half calculating. I took the seat left for me. The outsider's seat? Still. Darlene smiled tightly. "We've been thinking, Eileen," she said, passing me a glass of wine without waiting for me to accept it. "There's a way forward, for all of us." I braced myself. She launched into it. How the family business was struggling, how my brand was gaining attention, how merging them could restore the Warnos name to its rightful prestige. "We would, of course, give you a significant role," Calvin added smoothly, "though final oversight would remain within the family leadership structure. Meaning not me, meaning Rochelle. Meaning I would build the empire and they would wear the crown." I placed the glass back on the table, untouched. "And if I refuse?" I asked, voice calm, almost detached. Darlene blinked. "For the family's sake," she said, voice trembling just enough to seem real. "You must consider it." As I hesitated, torn between rage and sadness, Calvin clutched his chest dramatically, slumping back into his chair. Clarissa gasped. Jonas shot me a pleading look. "He's not well," Darlene whispered urgently. "He needs peace, Eileen. We all do." The theater was laughable if it hadn't been so cruel. I stood slowly. "You don't need my business," I said quietly. "You need a scapegoat, and you thought you raised one." The room stilled. Without another word, I walked out, leaving the door swinging behind me. The next morning, at a small public event at my studio, I made my stand. I stood on the makeshift stage in front of my display of handcrafted jewelry, my heart hammering loud enough to echo off the concrete walls. "I built this from nothing," I said. "No name but my own, no approval but my own." A few people clapped, most simply listened. I didn't need the applause. I only needed the truth to breathe. When the event ended, I stayed behind, turning off the lights one by one, letting the darkness swallow the day. At the door, I paused. Behind me, the studio smelled like ambition and resin and old wood, my kingdom. Outside, the night was wide open, and somewhere, behind closed curtains, I knew they were plotting their next move. But they'd find the chains they once wrapped around me lying broken at their feet. The applause rang out in steady, echoing waves, bouncing against the high ceilings of the Sacramento Art Center. I stood under the stage lights, clutching the heavy glass award that somehow felt lighter than air in my hands. For a moment, the world sharpened to a single point. The sound of clapping hands, the smell of fresh flowers in the lobby, the shimmer of gold threading the edges of the velvet curtains. They said my name, not with hesitation, not with conditions, just my name, Eileen Warnos. I stepped off the stage into a swirl of congratulations. Strangers, artists, patrons, critics, offered kind words, asked about my next projects, shook my hand like I belonged among them. And then, through the crowd, I saw them. Darlene, Calvin, Rochelle, Clarissa, Jonas, tucked near the back, not listed on the guest registry, pretending they were supposed to be there. Pretending that we hadn't burned the bridge down to ashes. The photographer called me over for post-ceremony pictures. I smiled tightly, preparing myself. As the flashbulbs popped, I heard Darlene's voice, soft and syrupy, speaking to a nearby reporter. "We always believed in her," she said, the lie slipping from her tongue as easily as her old perfume. "We supported her every step of the way." My stomach twisted, not in surprise, but in a deep, weary familiarity. Before I could say anything, they closed in, arranging themselves around me for a photo. Flashing bright smiles for cameras they thought would forget the story behind the picture. I let them. I let the photographer take the shot. I let Darlene bask in the stolen light. And then, before another shutter click could trap me in their frame, I stepped back, out of reach, out of their narrative. The interview swirled on without me. I walked through the lobby, past congratulatory banners, past trays of champagne glasses until the noise dulled behind me. Outside, the night was cool and alive, the city humming under a pale slice of moon. I made my way home slowly, the award heavy under my arm, the silence heavier still. In my studio, the air smelled like sawdust and clay and something sweeter. Freedom, maybe. I placed the award next to the first necklace I had ever made, back when I still thought approval was a prize worth chasing. Side by side, they didn't seem so different. Both were milestones. Both were proof. One born from hope, the other born from survival. I sat down at my workbench, running my fingers along the smooth spine of my sketchbook. There were scars I would carry forever, silences too loud to forget, absences that left permanent shadows. But there were also new things being born inside me. I opened the sketchbook to a blank page. The pencil felt familiar between my fingers, light and sure. I began to sketch, a phoenix rising from shattered glass, wings cut by fire but stronger for it. The phone buzzed once on the table. Darlene's name lit up the screen. I watched it ring, the glow pulsing like a heartbeat I no longer answered to. When it stopped, the quiet that remained felt clean. I turned back to the page, letting the lines flow without fear. Some endings don't need words. Some victories are silent. Some freedoms are forged quietly, brick by painful brick. Looking back, I realize now that no matter how much we long for it, acceptance from others can never replace the acceptance we owe ourselves. Family can be a gift or a lesson. In my case, it was both. I learned that sometimes, in order to build a life that feels true, you have to walk away from the ones who only love a version of you that fits their mold. Choosing yourself is not selfish, it's survival. And healing doesn't always come with loud victories. Sometimes, it's the quiet decision to keep going, even when no one claps for you. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between who you are and who people expect you to be? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments. Drop a 1 inch if this story touched your heart, or let me know where you're tuning in from. And if this video resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more real stories that remind us we're never truly alone. See you in the next story.